Good evening and welcome to the 71st round of the Cairo Climate Talks. My name is Nadim Abdelgawad. I am a political economist and environmental researcher, and I've had the fortune to work on renewable energy and rights-based development and environmental justice issues in the MENA region mainly, and a little bit in Latin America. And I'm currently based in Berlin, where I'm researching the political economy of green transition in the context of emerging economies, which brings us to today's topic. Thank you once again for joining us. In 70 sessions of Cairo Climate Talks, CCT has tackled many topics that all feed into the impacts of climate change and environmental challenges. Session topics have ranged from clean technology and food security to public health and energy, to name a few. Today's panel discussion is titled Businesses and SDGs, How to Continue to Move Towards Sustainable Markets. After the COVID-19 pandemic started and drastic public measures were debated and taken to fight the spread of the virus, many saw this as a potential moment of reckoning. COVID-19 exacerbated many of the challenges we already face today. For instance, marginalized communities that were already the most vulnerable to the adverse effects of global warming faced another layer of vulnerability under this virus. The way we organize the economy and the question of what jobs are essential, what kind of conditions and payments are essential workers receiving, and are they enough, as well as questions about prioritizing economic growth versus protecting public health and well-being. These are all examples of the questions that we were forced to tackle now more than ever. Questions that perhaps a lot of political and economic elites have maybe avoided dealing with for as long as possible before. It is within this context that we have seen a significant shift in public debate. Terms that were once completely overlooked by mainstream academic and policy circles, such as Green New Deal, rights-based economy, degrowth, among others, to name a few, are gaining more traction today. For example, we've seen progressive policymakers adopt a Green New Deal project that they are trying to push through the legislative bodies in the world's largest economy and emitter of CO2 as well, the US. At the World Economic Forum in Davos in early 2020, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that the whole way we do business, the way we live, and that we have grown accustomed to in the industrial age will have to be changed. We will have to leave that behind us in the next 30 years, and we have to come to completely new value chains. These are examples that maybe if somebody had said that they would happen 10 years ago, they would have called them crazy, but here we are. On the other hand, within Egypt's context, some argue that high youth and unemployment and the dire economic situation do not leave much room for these kinds of alternative progressive ideas and ways to reimagine our economies. Realizing the complexity of business and SDGs and the transition to sustainable forms of organizing our economy, we have today a multidisciplinary panel of 4 experts where we try to bring views from the private sector, academia, and civil society. I'm personally very, very excited to be part of this conversation and to listen to their insights. So our agenda will start today with this address, and with a welcome address from Mr. Philippe Moape, and then we are going to jump directly into our conversation. So let me first welcome Mr. Philippe Moape, Head of the Science Department at the German Embassy in Cairo. The floor is now open for you, Mr. Moape.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Nadim. Thank you so much, dear Cairo Climate Talkers, dear panelists, dear participants. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 71st round of Cairo Climate Talks. And I'm very happy that today we have a very international panel, and one panel that brings together panelists from Germany and from Egypt. And as some colleagues were already mentioning to me before, in a very climate friendly way, because it's through Zoom and no one had to fly for this event. So I'm very happy that this is this challenging situation is contributing to us being able to do more climate-friendly events. Thank you very much for that. So thank you also, Nadim, for your wonderful introduction of the topic. I'm not going to introduce much more about the topic except for saying I'm very much interested in what you all have to say. We had a lot of discussions in the CCT teams how to best approach these questions. And I think we now have a good overview for the panel to discuss this with us, where we can go with business in the future with climate change. I'm always impressed when I look back at the CCT, because as you know, at the embassy, we only work at this project for a couple of years. And I look back, it's already been 71 CCTs. It's almost 10 years. Next year will be our 10th anniversary. And so many things have been done. And we're very happy to be working on this interesting project with our partners, and especially, of course, with the GIZ that I see here. And one of our partners also that's really important for working in the terms of getting our message out to a wider audience are our journalists, which have been since the beginning a very, very close partner and very important player in this. And I just wanted to announce a new award that we're developing here at CCT. We can see that environmental journalism plays a really, really important role here for everyone, and it plays a role in transmitting the important messages we have to everyone here in Egypt. So this year we're announcing the CCT 2020 Environmental Journalism Award, and we're actually calling upon all Egyptian journalists who have published something in the Egyptian media and online, on the radio and TV, to send us their writings, their works, and we will award 5 of them a prize, and the prize will be given to them by the ambassador early next year. So I encourage everyone who is a journalist, who has contact with journalists, to tell them about this award and for them to participate, to see the great work that the journalists are doing in Egypt to help us spread the message about environmental protection and climate change. So thank you very much to all of you. I'm very, very happy that you're here. It's a great discussion to have tonight. Thank you again to our partners at the ministry for their support, for everyone for joining us from Germany and Egypt. Especially thank you to our panelists and our moderator, our translators, our team, and I wish you all an excellent discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Felipe. Before we start, I would like to make a short announcement in Arabic and English. من فضلكم لو حد حابب الترجمة بالعربي يدخل على الشانل الألماني German channel والترجمة بالعربي. احنا اسفين انه الموضوع يلخبط شوية، بس ده لانه زوم ما فيهوش اختيار العربي بس. فالشانل الألماني هيكون عليها الترجمة الفورية العربي. I just announced in Arabic, and I'd like to announce again in English, that if you're looking for Arabic interpretation, you can find it on the German channel. It's a bit confusing. We're sorry about that, but that's just because Zoom does not have an Arabic option. So if you click and choose the German channel, you can find Arabic interpretation. Thank you very much. So without further additions, I would like to welcome our panelists. I would like to start with Ms. Ghada Hamouda. She's the Chief Sustainability and Marketing Officer for Al-Qal'a Holdings. She's on the board of Cairo American College. Her focus is on the responsibility of the private sector to engage with the SDGs. She led the public listing, business and transformation and entry to African markets in Qal'a Holdings in pioneering sectors like solid waste management and river transportation, and developed their corporate responsibility programs. This is among a very long and impressive bio that you can find online. So welcome, Ms. Ghada. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to also welcome Ms. Anna Pregels. She's a senior researcher at the German Development Institute, DIE, Germany. Her research focuses on the economic and political aspects of climate change mitigation, in particular the transition to clean energy in developing countries. Furthermore, as an economist, she has worked on, to name a few, low carbon development, green industrial policy, and circular economy and recycling, among other interrelated topics. Welcome, Ms. Anna, and great to have you. I would like to also welcome Ms. Kenda Mohammadaya, based in Geneva now. She's currently a legal advisor and senior researcher at the Third World Network. Previously and prior to this, she was a senior researcher at the Global Governance for Development Program of the South Center, where she worked on issues relating to international investment governance and the role and accountability of business enterprises with respect to human rights. She has also worked as policy advisor at the Arab NGO Network for Development based in Beirut, where she addressed issues relating to development and economic policies in the Arab region. And finally, it's my pleasure to also welcome our panelist, Mr. Yunus Naguib. He's the cluster coordinator for private sector development at the GIZ. His work focuses on the promotion of small and medium enterprises and approaches to foster innovation to create new and better jobs. Prior to working at GIZ Egypt, he has also worked in Indonesia and Germany, tackling SME support and job creation. Welcome, Mr. Yunus, and great to have you, Skinda, Anna, Gheda, and Mr. Yunus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to, Yunus, I would like to start with you, actually. You've been working in Egypt and on jobs, which is a very, very important issue in general and during COVID in the whole world right now as unemployment increases globally, but even more importantly, some would say, or arguably within emerging economies. Egypt has a young nation, around 65% under 35 years old. There's also a high unemployment rate, and it's an issue that is prioritized definitely by the government and different organizations and civil society organizations. Within this context, if I would like to ask you about climate change mitigation and the SDGs, the first thing that comes to many people's minds, how can we do both? Is it even possible? I would like to hear your thoughts on this. And it would be great if we stick in our answers for the questions to around 3 minutes. This would allow also for Q&A because we've had many people who are interested in asking their questions as well. So we need to make some room for this.
Thank you, Nadim. Yeah, I guess that's a quite complicated question. I mean, in general, if we look at sustainability as a topic, obviously we always have 3 dimensions of sustainability, environmental issues being one. And if I look in general at the situation in Egypt, then the main focus at the moment that I see here is a focus on, let's say, the economic and the social dimension. You said already we have a huge challenge with unemployment. We have every year between 800,000 and 1 million job entrants into the job market. You would need, at least under current conditions, a growth rate of 6 to 8% annually to be able to absorb, for the economy to be able to absorb these new job entrants. So whenever the growth rate is lower at the moment, the issue is getting more challenging. So that is clearly at the moment, I would say, in the focus here in Egypt, and my understanding as well, a strong focus of the Egyptian government that we are collaborating with. And here, the German government agreed with the Egyptian government to be working on that issue in particular. Now, of course, there are a number of topics when it comes to environmental issues that you can look into, definitely. I mean, on the one hand, topics of resource efficiency, so that current companies that are active are working in a more resource efficient way, looking as well at new business models that tackle different issues, waste management, renewable energy, and all these kind of topics with help of new companies, the startups that are dealing with these, or already established companies that look into the topic of how they can adjust their business model to be more environmentally friendly. That are, of course, options, but it very often, to be working, it very often needs as well a clear, let's say, regulatory framework to set the right incentives. I remember a couple of years ago, for example, we, as GIZ here in Egypt, worked quite strongly on the topic of resource efficiency. And at that time, energy prices in general were so low that the incentives in the business sector was very low to pick up on resource efficient practices, because basically it was more expensive to do that than to just consume more energy. This is changing as well in Egypt. So I see that the interest for that is growing, and we as GIZ as well are again looking into the topic of energy efficiency and more energy efficiency practices. But it stays definitely a challenge, no discussion.
Thank you, Yunus. Maybe that leads, okay, two questions in relation to this that we're ready. So this is the perfect transition. I would like to maybe start by you, Ms. Ghada, since also thank you. You had a busy schedule today, but you'll have to leave us a bit earlier for another commitment. So maybe let's take this question with you. Then there's the question of the role of the private sector. Mm-hmm. Given your background and your capacity, your current occupation and capacity, what could be the incentives, maybe, if any, that could be given to investors, or that investors basically could use to be part of a green transition? And what are your thoughts on this?
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me today. And as we're all grappling with this virus and with this pandemic that have affected capitalism and economies worldwide, and Egypt too, from short-term disruptions that we're all living through to long-term value disruption, and we're all trying to figure out how to maintain value. The recovery we're looking at seems to be a long one, fragmented, inconsistent, and uneven. And that means, and it meant that a lot of our businesses had to adapt, adjust quickly, look and relook at our business models, how we can become more flexible, and how we can quickly keep track of the changes in consumption habits, patterns, government stimulus that are being put in place to help us survive and get through. This will be, as I said, a slow recovery, and it's putting a lot of pressure on job creation, on private sector. Globally, I'm a bit more bullish on Egypt, but just because I've been here now for a number of years, and I'm looking at what the government was doing before and now. The global challenges the world is facing are not, we don't feel it as hard here. It's a healthier fiscal and foreign currency position that we are really enjoying here. There are lower outlays for imported energy. We're not struggling because we have our own natural resources with gas. Business and households alike are having some productivity gains that we're enjoying. We're seeing significant investment from the government and from the private sector, and hopefully it will increase in agri and in other areas. And I do feel that currently, as Milton Friedman said wisely, only a crisis, actual or perceived, will produce change. And when it occurs, that change, in fact, will be determined a lot by the ideas that we're laying around. When COVID hit, there was a lot of pressure already on the business community, the global attention on environmental changes and ESG. And businesses in Egypt and in emerging markets have started to think and talk about things like green economy, language we've never had. We have seen a realization that ESG, in fact, is an investment issue. It's not just an issue that has to do, that's distant or that does not touch. If anything, those who are closer to the markets have seen and are seeing how connected COVID is to the environmental and climate change. We're also seeing how the Egyptian government has been putting a lot of focus on environmental sustainability language and integrating it into the Vision 2030, into the targets they're putting in place. And we will see more and more focus on disclosures as Egypt is trying to localize, standardize, and also maybe improve its exports globally. And I actually see that we have been moving around. I mean, Egypt has issued its first global green bond, and it's been very successful and oversubscribed. I think that the green projects will no doubt will help transition Egypt to a more sustainable future. But in that context, funding and access to finance from multilaterals, from DFIs, and attaching and associating a lot of that funding with environmental conditions and responsibility in consumption and in production and waste management will be really critical. I mean, we say that as a firm that started as a private equity firm, but and pivoted and changed our business model to investment holding. but we inaugurated during the pandemic our largest $4.7 billion US second stage refinery, which the German government is also a co-investor in. And it produces 0.5 quality product, and it's the first, largest of its kind in Africa. The Egyptian refining company, it's improving the quality of air in our country, and it is a second stage. So I think there is the big question of what is green. And I think we need to look at greener solutions from where we are here if we're going to try to really make this feasible for business. We are seeing pressure on conscientious capitalism, responsible capitalism, sustainable capitalism, and everyone is talking about it and what it means. There's a new social contract that is being rewritten. I think that there is also, and I'm very involved in the Federation of Egyptian Industries and a lot of the associations, business associations. The big topic of the day is how to start to rebuild together in public-private partnerships, in partnerships and collaborations that put the competition aside, where we can share data together, where we can maybe start to relook at supply chains and how we can, as industries, collaborate. There is no question that Egypt will benefit from the relocating distribution structures and infrastructures that are happening worldwide. And as we do that, we need to make it a very compelling and attractive place. Trends like servicing customers, exactly their demands and their needs, and starting to customize solutions to them, mean that we can actually start to develop and evolve the supply chains, and we can start to have multiple points, but also we can reduce the cost and become more efficient by using data very effectively and integrating and sharing data. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Reda. Before I move on with my next question, I'd like to just finally and thankfully a technical issue have been solved, and Dr. Ali Abu Senna, the Minister Assistant for Projects and Head of Bioenergy Association at the Ministry of Environment of the Arab Republic of Egypt, has just joined us. I'd like to welcome him. And Dr. Ali, would you like to have a short address? Since we can do it now?
Yeah, thank you very much, and sorry for being late. And I'm happy to be with you for this important session. And I would like just to ensure that for us at the Ministry of Environment, as part of the Egyptian government, we are really working very much related to go for green recovery and how we can help the country to deal with the impact of the COVID-19. So it is actually, I would like to ensure that there is some policy measures have been taken by the government at the government level. There was also some initiatives at the ground have been already started and to deal with this issue. And the lesson that we have all learned from this epidemic issue, that we have to deal with the environment in a more friendly way. And this is called all the countries to think about changing their work toward this more efficient use of resources, more pollution prevention activities, and taking into consideration to go with more new and green industries. So, for example, at the ministry level, we have 2 weeks ago, we got approval from the Egyptian cabinet to it's a compulsory now by all ministries to follow a sustainability criteria for all investment projects. So it means that it's now mandatory for any ministry that they have to follow a certain criteria, including the environmental regulation and the environmental performance, to be part of any investment activities. For example, at the Ministry of Petroleum, for any new investment, they have to take it very seriously, and the other ministries the same. So it was actually on a policy level very important issue have been taken by the government to ensure this. And on the other hand, we are working for putting a recovery plan, including the green recovery plan, which there is a lot of activities has been identified under the National Green Recovery Plan. For example, promotion of activities related to waste management and dealing with resource efficiency and cleaner production, pollution prevention, and this was also very important issue. Also, the government have been approved for the first time in Egypt the national waste law, which actually will tackle all the type of waste under the Ministry of Environment, represented by the Waste Regulatory Authority. It means that there will be one entity dealing with this issue in Egypt, and for the first time that this law is putting a responsibility for the Ministry of Environment for putting the plans, the policies, and putting the planning, and for other ministries too as implementers. And we have also another responsibility for monitoring. And the beauty in this law that it is including the investment opportunities and encouraging the green investment in the area of waste, and some concepts like EPR, extended producer responsibility, has put clearly in the law. It means that any producer of waste has to be responsible more on the end of life of such waste. This will create a lot of activities and a lot of businesses in this area. And from this, we ensure that we have a fast recovery, taking into consideration the green recovery measures, which definitely will lead, as other speakers were showing, a new market for new business, new SMEs will be more existed and demanded in the market. I mean, for example, working in the area of energy, water, waste management, and other green technologies will be much supported. So I think this is one of the fast lessons that have been learned in the emerging countries and developing countries and all the other countries, that they have to react in this way with a clear roadmap for green recovery and sustain it. So I think this is with the message that we wanted to say at the beginning from our side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali, and welcome to the panel. I would like to get back to the questions, and Kinda. So, as a legal expert, and you've worked in the region, but also in international organizations. I would like to see, when we're talking about the role of the private sector and a transition, the SDGs, and a transition to sustainable economies. Already the legal aspect was mentioned a little bit by some of the other panelists, and I would like to see your take of what are the opportunities and also barriers when we're talking about the legal framework for such a transition in emerging economies.
Great, thanks a lot, and thanks for bringing up the legal issues up front. So I will comment in two parts. I would like to take some time to comment first on the whole notion of the transformation, the new Green Deal, the new approaches under the framework of sustainable development. I think we are all very glad to hear these transformational notions and concepts. And I think the concept of sustainable development, which brings the economic, social, and environmental aspects together and try to push back on a quantitative approach to the notion of economic growth, has been welcome and by the international community. Like, it has been agreed by the international community by the mere agreement on the SDGs. And as previous speakers said, it has been reflected in the narrative of governments. And here, just a disclaimer, I'm not only commenting on the Egyptian government, because also I am not closely following what the Egyptian government is doing, except what the diplomatic mission does here in Geneva, and they do a great job, and at the World Trade Organization. But generally, the narrative has not really evolved or trickled into a shift in many cases in the policy and legislative action of governments. So there's often we see a gap between what the vision of the government is and what they are actually doing, including through the commitments they are undertaking under international agreements, for example. And I follow trade and investment agreements, and we see that often the changes there are semantic changes, they are superficial changes, and there's not really a fundamental change in the nature of the commitment in a way that does not restrict the policy space of the government to dynamically intervene in order to link investment to sustainable development. So a lot of the tools that the government needs are often restricted by these treaties and also by the contracts they have with investors, whether domestic and international investors. So often we say that we need to look at how the narrative is being reflected in these legal tools, whether the international commitment or the domestic legislative framework, and also how we are building coherence between the multiple sectors at the domestic level. So we often have a clear investment policy, and we have a clear investment framework, like a domestic investment law, public-private partnership laws, but we see that they are blind often to the sustainability considerations, to the human rights considerations. And we see that the government is, instead of operating in a comprehensive approach, is operating still in silos. And this is contrary to what we think is needed in order to effectuate a transformation of the scale that we are talking about. The second thing is the notion of the New Deal and the Green New Deal. It's very important to just highlight that when we talk about a new Green Deal, it's not an environmental concept, or it's not an environmental approach to the economy, or it's not just more financing for environmental projects. It is way beyond that. It is addressing the fundamentals of the economy. So it is basically addressing the industrial developmental policy. It's addressing the policy to redress inequalities, including, for example, the fair share of labor in production returns, the issue of dismantling over-concentration of economic power in our markets, because that is contrary to, as well, the ability to provide more space for small and medium enterprises and entrepreneurial approaches. It is also addressing the issue of the erosion of public spending and public investments in key sectors, which would also enable and incentivize more investments in some of the key sectors that we see needed in the transformation. So it's really about the fundamental issues pertaining to the role of the state, the role of the financial sector, and bringing back the notion of productivity to our economies, especially the Arab countries, where we see, like, and economies like Egypt, where we see a lot of core sectors which historically Egypt was built around in terms of its productivity have been eroded over time. And this is not only about Egypt, it's about other Arab countries and developing countries in general. So just to say that when we are addressing the notion of the green economy, we need to realize that at the global level and at the regional level, different people people, different stakeholders understand this notion differently. So we really need to take time to unpack it and to put upfront what we mean. And for us as public interest organizations concerned with development, we see it as a much more fundamental issue about the role of the state. The last thing to note is I totally agree with Ms. Ghada that we have a lot more talk, including among the private sector, of corporate purpose, moving from a shareholder approach to stakeholderism. We need more focus on, we have more focus on environmental, social, and governance issues. But still, we have also here a problem with the whole notion of let us do it ourselves as the private sector. And here we face a lot of issues because then we will have a lot of discrepancies in the approaches of the private sector, and some of the private enterprises would not really want to do much in that regard. So in terms of serving the transformation, I think private ordering in that regard is not good enough. And actually, it's interesting, I just read a study from Harvard by some of the mainstream corporate lawyers, which were saying that the narrative on stakeholder approach of corporations could backfire on those interested in protecting stakeholders, because it will divert the attention from the needed regulation and intervention to change the current legal frameworks, including corporate law, including the other disclosure regulations pertaining to corporations, issues pertaining to director duties and all of that. It will divert from that and keep us in the space of thinking that by mere private ordering by companies themselves or self-regulation, we are in a safe space. And I honestly think that we need to unpack that issue as well as a crucial issue in the discussion of the role of the private sector, sustainability, and the way forward. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Anna, you've worked on industrial development and transition and low carbon transition on different countries. What are your thoughts? I'd like to hear your thoughts more about, as an economist, we talked about the legal aspect of it, but as an economist, what are the policies needed and maybe the challenges that are met with the implementation of these policies that halt a transition to a green economy?
Sure, thank you for this question. Okay, so on the one hand, we need to look at policies and what needs to be done. On the other hand, we need to look at the, let's say, the requirements and the frameworks for governments to actually do it, right? Be it the political will, be it the interest constellations in the countries. These can be severe barriers to the implementation of actual policies. And so I think there are the two sides of the coin. Jonas has already given a lot of information on what kind of policies are needed. Of course, every country needs to look at their individual situation, their individual contexts. But there are some activities that promise economic benefits and at the same time ecological benefits in most of the countries, and Jonas has already named some of them. So I'm not going to go into detail on that. But the question is, of course, why do we see so little of these activities? And on the one hand, it's of course about complexity, right? So establishing those legal frameworks to initiate the radical change that we need to see is not trivial, right? So organizing, for example, a switch from a centralized energy system based on fossil fuel that can provide base load to a renewable energy-based system that provides intermittent supply and where demand has to follow supply is technically and regulatory difficult, right? So I think the capacity building for governments, for regulators is key. And I think it's not just North-South cooperation, but also South-South cooperation that can go a long way here. Egypt, for example, cooperating with South Africa, where we see a very successful model of the feed-in tariff. So just an exchange of experiences, exchange of ideas, I think can be very valuable here. Of course, the second aspect is the elephant in the room, right? The political will. And I mean, in many countries, we see very strong coalitions of interests that stand against a radical transformation, because so many people benefit from the system as it is, right? Many people also do not benefit from the system. They suffer from the system, but they are not the ones in power. So at some point, we need to think about how can we get the veto players on board? How can we radically restructure our economies, possibly also against the veto players? And I think these are the questions that we need to think a bit harder about, and that we will have to tackle, because the window of opportunity clearly exists now. We are in a global crisis, and crises always provide us with opportunities to think out of the box and to see that radical change is indeed possible. But translating that into policies and actions that that bring about the emission reductions, if we just talk about climate change, but also, of course, the improvements in resource use, the move to a circular economy, other pollutants that we keep on putting into the environment. Well, it is a challenge, I think, for all of the countries, and we need to think hard about how to overcome it.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ghada, let's start with your question also for the time. Then given the points mentioned by the fellow panelists, especially Anna and Kinda on one hand, and also we have like according to the IPCC report, it's estimated that in order to have a 50% to 66% chance to keep global warming below 1.5 Celsius, as per the Paris Agreement, global emissions need to be reduced to around half the present levels by 2030. And we need to reach a net zero by 2050. This is a very serious situation when we speak globally. You've talked about, and we've talked about, incentives for big investors and big conglomerates, and you've even mentioned Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman's name is also associated with a lot of the neoliberal policies that are blamed for
where we are today.
Yes, so let me play devil's advocate a little bit. If people are listening now, and we're talking, we live in a world, especially with the younger generations, the Friday for Future, all of these movements, there is anger, and there is a serious dissent against the current status quo because of the numbers mentioned earlier. So why would these people still think that the private sector or bigger investors can still be actually part of the solution, not the problem?
Very good question. And I totally agree with you about Milton Friedman. If anything, I think the whole shift and move that we're hearing and seeing in terms of starting to focus on multi-stakeholder purpose, triple bottom lines and everything, and more responsible, conscientious capitalism is all backlash to, but it's a statement of where this new generation is, and where there's I would say, from everything I'm hearing, we need to acknowledge that this is all about partnerships, public-private partnerships that need to start to emerge and work harder. On one hand, I think what we're seeing is the government is stepping in. According to EBRD, the small government consensus may be coming to an end. True, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, COVID-19 is causing public opinion in a lot of the emerging economies to ask for the governments to become more involved. So the state may get and should get involved. And I think having enlightened policy is a very critical piece of this equation. Policies like the ones we've seen happen in Egypt, policies that have taken away the subsidies and we started to see a decline in consumption of fossil fuel. Policies that started to build logistics networks that are sharply starting to reduce not just the time the time to market, but also the loss of produce and adverse conditions at each step in the transportation chain. These improvements are critical and they're because of smart policies. But then no economy can be said to be green unless it's equitable. And you cannot achieve this equity or finance the transitions needed without the private sector. A great deal of the work is left to be done. And I think when we look at why the private sector should be a lead partner, this is where you get the power of new ideas. This is the daring financing, the know-how and the skills and the access. And in fact, if anybody, I mean, one should look, I guess, with, to a certain extent, admiration with how fast the private sector globally had to move and change. Some basically, unfortunately, could not continue to survive, but the majority really have acted fast and in an agile way and helped continue and maintain economies. So the power of ideas, the daring financing, private sector-led growth is essential. And to me, they create meaningful jobs that pay for the living wage, the balance between the lives and the livelihoods. Bringing consumers into a formal financial system is critical. This is where today we have 1 in 3 Egyptians participating in the banking sector and hopefully with the financial system. And hopefully with the changes we're seeing, and we're seeing a lot more in our consumption-led economy in the midst of this revolution. There's a lot of focus on financial inclusion with the SMEs. We're seeing micro, small, and medium-sized businesses efforts to bring them into the formal economy, and that will benefit as they will be able to benefit from access to credit when this happens. So I think the private sector has a role to play, the government has a role to play, but then there is also capital and access to capital, which is really hard. And I think governments, as they are allocating these policies, there's the carrot and the stick, there's the incentives, and there's also the standards and punishments. International finance institutions have really played a very critical piece here in terms of access to finance. They have particularly been important for Qala and a lot. They're partners with us in BenBan, they're partners with us in the Egyptian Refining Company and many others. And the names like FMO, DEGA, ABRD, IFC are like really common and known here, household names in Egypt. The more we put green strings and associate those with access to finance. And to date, they've done that. It's just we need to see more of this. Conditions being put and associations between the access to funding and being responsible, environmentally responsible. They've already have helped us, as I said, and many other Egyptian, large Egyptian projects, facilitating access to low-cost capital with green strings. So I also do believe that between this triangle of enlightening government policy, access to global and domestic capital conditioned on green strings, credentials, and then private sector know-how, I think these 3 are critical. But then there's also a realization of risk. Don't underestimate what the private sector globally had to go through now. We have learned to try to optimize, to become more efficient, to try to reduce given the squeeze on liquidity. And in that process also, we're learning to look at how to become more efficient in our energy consumption. And a lot of the things that today, in fact, would have taken many, many, many years to change. I think there is a whole new look at how to improve and become more responsible in our practices. So I hope that helped answer a little bit of the question.
Thank you very much. Yunus, since we're talking about SMEs, you've been working on SMEs a lot from the perspective of maybe civil society, more or less. I mean, GIZ is in this peculiar situation. I know right now, a lot of the people listening in are young people involved or interested in being part of the startup scene in Egypt, which has been vibrant despite all the issues that we talk about in many panel discussions, and of course in specifically green industries. So from your perspective, what are the things, one, that needs to be done more in order to support SMEs, green SMEs, in this kind of transition as we talk about new ideas, for example, and innovation. And yeah, some of the tips you would give maybe to policymakers and to people starting in this scene.
Thank you very much for the question, Nadim. Let me maybe, if you allow me, I want to ask a question to the other panelists from what I was listening to before, and then I'll definitely come to try and answer your question. Because I'm wondering somehow, I mean, we're talking about the necessity for policies to react to climate change. Now, I definitely and clearly understand that it's a big necessity for the Egyptian government, in the case that we're talking about, to look at the topic of, let's say, climate resilience. How can, for example, smallholder farmers be made more climate resilient, being able to react to the things that are going to happen to them over the next years and decades. My question, though, on the other hand, is if somebody from the Egyptian government would ask, why should we be the ones that do all the adjustments that are necessary that we're talking about, and in the same way risk our competitiveness on world markets, while in the same time our CO2 emissions are less than 1% of the world. So it doesn't really make such a difference. So the argumentation here, I would be very interested why the Egyptian government should do anything in the first place. Don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm not convinced that they should, but still the argument is a valid one, I think. And to come to your question, yes, we are. I mean, we have been working and are still working here in Egypt strongly, mainly with the Ministry of Trade and Industry, but as well with other ministries on supporting the dynamism of startups here in Egypt, in various industrial sectors, as well partially programs that focus in particular on green startups. And we basically are tackling the entire chain, let's say, from an idea phase up to a rather mature SME, and having with various partners here in the country programs that basically incubate and accelerate SMEs here and startups, definitely. So I strongly believe that a more vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem, and we definitely see that happening in Egypt over the last years, will help in general the economy to become more innovative, and that is one of the big challenges that the Egyptian economy has. It's not innovative enough, and definitely having startups, having young people trying to bring their ideas to markets is something that is very useful. And I believe that there are really a lot of programs at the moment here in the country trying to support people that have entrepreneurial spirit. And I have the highest respect for people that start their own business. I always envy them somehow. Yeah, I think that's one of the ways forward to go.
Thank you very much. We would like, it would be important to give room for Q&A shortly, but I would like to take a couple more questions. So first of all, Yunus, thank you so much for bringing up this question, actually. And it leads into my question to Ms. Anna. So basically, there's this argument that has been made a lot in the UN for obvious reasons, very good reasons, but by a lot of developing countries, as Yunus was talking about. Basically, we didn't do the damage and we need to catch up economically. But somehow we're still involved into this whole issue of climate change mitigation and cutting down on carbon dioxide emissions. And then, so we can talk about degrowth or a Green New Deal or moving beyond economic growth, whatever you want to name it or call it. And these are different ideas that mean different things. But then there's the question of redistribution of wealth. if we are going to do this, then there are economies that need to be built. There are people who are under poverty line or living barely by poverty line in Egypt. It's the majority. You cannot just bring these ideas talking about for organizing the economy in a more sustainable way while these people will still suffer in a way. So how would you tackle an issue like this, given also your international capacity and your view?
Sure. So maybe to first try and tackle the question, why should the Egyptian government act? As you yourself, Jonas, said, some investments in green sectors, green industries directly pay off, right? So for Egypt, obviously, energy efficiency would be among those areas. I could imagine, without being an expert on the Egyptian economy, but water efficiency, other resources, the country directly benefits from at least some of those sectors, as well in terms of job creation and in terms of climate change mitigation or saving other natural resources. So I think there are areas that need not really be discussed. They can be fostered right away. I think if there's any such thing as an enlightened government, it should have the future of the people in mind, meaning not just the coming year or the current election period, but also beyond. And that is not just the ecological future. I mean, we are talking in the background of such a severe ecological crisis looming that we might risk the basis for human civilization, right? So let's not lose sight of that. I think that as an argument is already quite strong. Having said that, there are also very clear economic arguments, I think, to venture into green sectors, to venture into green technologies, because these technologies are the ones of the future, right? And I think an enlightened government can see that and already now starts to shift the pathways and starts to build capacities and starts to tries to avoid the lock-in of unsustainable pathways, right? Because shifting pathways takes a lot of time. And I think those who start early can get a head start, right? And can build the competitive advantages of the future. And so thinking, for example, about, particularly in the area of energy, maybe about hydrogen, right? What kind of capacities does a country need to benefit from investments in new technology, new green sectors, right? And then start to invest, because training people takes time, building the institution takes time. And the earlier a country starts, the more chances it has to find its niche in the markets of the future. That's basically the argument that I would have. Now, Nadim, you also ventured into the topic of degrowth, right? And that is, of course, something that that we probably also need to start thinking about. How do we deal with a planet that may limit our options for growth at some point, right? Because if we don't think about it ourselves, then the planet itself will at some point throw us into degrowth, and that will be crisis driven. And I think none of us wants to experience that situation. So it would make sense to, before we enter into those crises, think about how we want to restructure our mindsets. Yeah? And that is, of course, something that takes some effort, because for a long time we've been used to think in economic terms, to measure the success of nations in terms of GDP. However, GDP does not capture a lot of the aspects that we now see are very important for our very survival, right? So we need to basically radically rethink the mindset with which we measure the success of nations. And we need to rethink what we as humans want to have, what kind of future we want to see, right? And I think the idea behind measuring success in terms of GDP is that we, for quite a while, have thought that more wealth makes us happier. And for many, many people on this planet, this is true, because they do not have enough wealth to be able to consume on a level that can allow them happiness. Many people, on the other hand, and these are those who use most of the natural resources, have enough wealth and use it for a lot of consumption. And maybe they, and I would like to say we, because I'm probably among them, have to rethink whether that link is actually true, consumption, happiness. And I think, I mean, there's a lot of research already on out there on human happiness and what makes us happy. And most of the aspects that make us happy have nothing to do with wealth, right? Beyond basic needs, of course, right? So strong social ties, friendships, family, enough time for myself for relaxation, a job or activity in my life that I perceive as fulfilling, meditation. These are the things that make people happy. And so I think we have to develop concepts that allow us to measure happiness rather than GDP, and take that as an indicator for the success of nations.
Thank you very much. If we had more time, I would have maybe tried to be a little bit more annoying with the four of you on the difficult questions of degrowth and wealth redistribution. But since we don't have, I think you might want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, it's about responsible growth. We cannot talk about degrowth. It's responsible growth. We have to do it in a much more responsible, at the level of the citizen, at the level of nations, corporations, everyone, and cross countries. It has to be done in a more responsible way. And I think this is, if there's anything we're all learning, as Anna's saying, and I think you, Anna, and everybody, what is the motive? What is the reason? And the reason is, I mean, I as a mother, I worry about the next generation. I worry about my kids' access to the resources that we have depleted. And I think if we say that at all different levels, there is a realization now that this is limited, it's being depleted, these resources need to be at least replenished, and we neutralize our impact. I think that if you look at the Egyptian government and why it's doing it, I think they're doing it because they see the opportunity. While they do have water issues and challenges that they need to address, and while they're using green bonds to fund the water desalination and many other, but fundamentally it is about providing a good life for the generations to come and preserving what we currently have and adding to it. So I think if we all believe in this, that's the motive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ghada. And it's good. I was about to ask if you'd like to comment on Eunice's question. Ms. Kinda, please, would you like to comment before I move to my question to you? Would you like to comment first? Yeah.
Sure. I really appreciate all the insights. For me, I listening to everything that has been said, I like to look at the issue of transformation both at the individual level, which is very important. And I think a few questions are dealing with that, and it's the starting point. But definitely we need to differentiate between transformation at the individual's level and transformations in the interstate system that rules the world today. Because transformations within the interstate system will have to be incentivized by, one, the historical responsibilities and the historical debt pertaining to climate change being actually well addressed. And this was a crucial issue in dealing with the consensus under the Paris Agreement on Convention on Climate Change. And also it needs to be dealt with in terms of the cooperation among the states of the world, those that have the science and the technology and those that have not, for dealing with the climate necessary technologies as a global public good and advancing it equitably in order to deal with this collective challenge. Without these two things, I see it very hard to incentivize or keep the incentive to fulfill whatever objective has been agreed on under the Paris Convention or will be agreed to in the future. But going back to the main point I wanted to interact with, which is the role of the private sector. Again, I do believe that the role of the private sector is crucial in the transformation. And here, and this is why it is very important to discuss in more in-depth what do we mean by the big terminologies that we are using about responsible financing and responsible corporate conduct, etc. So if we look at public-private partnerships, for sure, I believe they are important to discuss, because if we're talking about transformation, this is what is going to contribute in big ways to transformation, because these are the big projects. Infrastructure transformation, cities transformation, health system, education system transformation, etc. And here, if we don't talk about the legislative framework that is underpinning these public-private partnerships, so public-private partnership laws, investment laws, and the related contracts, then we will still be just talking. We need to address the terms of the contractual relationships that are underpinning these public-private partnerships. And we know that from the experience thus far, and PPPs are not new, but they are more now under the spotlight. But thus far, studies have shown that most PPPs, PPP laws and PPP contracts have lacked the sustainability criteria, have lacked addressing the responsibilities of the private entity party to this contract, and have lacked the required ingredients to guarantee this transformation to sustainable infrastructure and sustainable investment. And here I'm not saying this myself. You can look at the reports by McKinsey, for example, the famous, well-known international consultancy that provides in its research evidence about the lack of these incentives within the PPP legislative framework, and notes that we need to overcome the current resistance to adopting sustainability criteria in PPPs by actually changing the valuation methodologies of the risks and the impacts that these projects have. So it's actually because currently what we have as criteria of studying the impacts and the risks is not well equipped to capture the implications from a sustainability point of view. So I would say that we really need to look closer. Also, we need to look closer at the advice of the multilateral development banks that were referenced by Ms. Ghada. For sure, the IFC, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, they have crucial roles in the Arab region, but also a lot of studies pertaining to the kind of advice that and guidance that comes from the multilateral banks pertaining to PPPs have showed that they are not fit for purpose when we're talking about sustainability and human rights and developmental criteria. And here I can talk about the report by the US-based law firm, the Hogue LLP, in 2017, which has studied the World Bank guidance on PPPs and contractual frameworks pertaining to PPPs, and said that the guidance prioritizes the private sector preferences and requirements over the public policy considerations in PPPs, and fails to achieve an appropriate balance between the rights of the investor and the obligations of the investor in comparison to those of the government, and does not take at all the rights of the communities impacted by these projects into consideration. So we have gaps and we need to face them, and we need to be direct in dealing with them, or otherwise we will still be stuck in the discrepancy between the narrative and the actual legal underpinnings, which I think without the legislative frameworks, the rights and obligations cannot be guaranteed. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for your very, very substantial comments. Ms. Ghada, I'm not sure with your time right now, maybe you'd like to have a minute before you have, like, please tell me about your current schedule.
Yes, this is very interesting, and I do not want to leave. I have about 5 more minutes.
So maybe can you have the floors for a minute or two then?
Thank you.
Yeah, because it would be great to hear from you.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting that to hear about the whole legal framework and how do you find examples of successful public-private partnerships. And I will just zoom in on one of our key projects. I think first of all, to Anna's point, there is a will from the Egyptian government to really try to localize industries, to encourage the private sector and to work with the private sector. And I think this is something we're seeing this, I mean, the ratings of the country and its performance and its economy because of that commitment and that will. With that said, I mean, we do have on the ground examples of projects where Egypt has successfully been able to work. We have the Egyptian Refining Company project that was inaugurated by the president in just a few weeks ago. It ticks every checkpoint. So it saves for Egypt as between 600 million to $1 billion cost of foreign currency to import diesel. It solves, it's a locally produced product, so it's an import substitution of 30 to 40% of Egypt's needs of diesel and high value add products. Environmentally, it cleans the air, it eliminates 186,000 tons of sulfur dioxide. And then the whole deal is it's a second stage refinery. We take our input from Cork, which is an existing refinery. And then it's an offtake agreement with the government, and they'll buy from us at international prices. Oh, that's so cute. The voice of the future generation.
Yes, very cute.
So the point is, I mean, there is a will, and it takes a lot. It took 12 years. This is a project that was 12 years in the making. And as I said, if it weren't for all of our partners, and it's an example in the level of employment it created over almost 20,000 jobs and during its construction, the knowledge transfer and know-how, the nationalist people are very proud. The Egyptians are working on that project, and the engineers from the local community felt very proud and did not migrate, did not leave the country because they felt they have opportunities and they learned that they could do things. These projects and it achieves energy efficiency, and it shows that you can have the private sector lead in putting together a financing package and produce a product that is value add, that localizes an industry and we're doing it across different things. So I just wanted to comment on that. And I also wanted to say it's interesting because I do feel that emerging markets right now are poised to leapfrog the developed countries in every area, from clean energy to food security to equitable access to financial systems. I mean, we're starting from a very low base. So truly the room is there, is amazing. All these unbanked large populations. So, and you can create wealth today if you do it in a responsible way as a business, but also you can do it if you're looking for solutions that address the base of the pyramid, that can work with SMEs and can integrate and try to provide solutions and bank really these populations that are underserved. So I find myself at this moment, while there is a lot of concerns about the climate, I mean, I think, and the economic recovery and what COVID has done and is doing to us, there is a lot that's happening in the ecosystem for SMEs, which I'm engaged with the startups, a lot of interest and maybe the access to financing is what is being worked on, but the innovation and the creativity and the desire to engage is there. And I am encouraged by the government's position in that. And I just want to conclude that I'm seeing the Ministry of Environment trying to work with the private sector, not just with the new laws that are coming out about waste management and SDG 12 with the responsible consumption and production and what you do with your waste, but also they are starting to do Tahaddar lil Akhdar, they're doing campaigns and starting to create public awareness. We are lacking, in order for the citizen and the change to happen on the ground with climate, we need to create that awareness. I'm very encouraged by the Ministry of Planning doing Tanmiya Mubadara initiative. I'm also encouraged by to hear about GIZ doing something for journalists. We do need to build the awareness, and we need responsible media and responsible citizens. And it will only happen if we educate, inform, engage, and take it to each citizen's level. So it is an age of a new social contract, and it's about, to me, it's about responsible citizenship across the board. So thank you so much for my time on this. I enjoyed, I learned so much from everyone on that on the panel today.
Pleasure to have you in here and listen to your insights. Also, I'm sorry, Mr. Yunus and Miss Anna, but I know, Ms. Kinda, you have to leave as well shortly, so maybe you'd like to have the floor for a minute. Would love to hear your remarks.
Well, thanks a lot for hearing me so far and giving me the space. I really appreciate all the dynamic interlinks as well that we have highlighted in this discussion. I do believe that, just to close on this note, that the whole issue of the role of small and medium enterprises is crucial in our countries, in developing economies, and I tend to look at it. I'm often interested in unpacking terminology. So for me, when we are talking about the enabling environment for SMEs, this is very crucial, but we also need to be kind of concerned with the dynamics between small and medium enterprises and bigger corporate entities within the dominant economic practice today under global value chains or regional value chains, even national value chains as well. So, and here we really need the attention of the regulating authority of the states to make sure that this space for small and medium enterprises domestic is not crowded out by the role of bigger players in the market, whether regional and domestic corporations active in our economies, or international or multinational corporations as well. Because we really have to take note that within the corporate sector, within the business enterprise sector, there's inequalities as well. So, and there is the crowding out effect that ends up eroding the possibility of the small and medium enterprises to actually benefit from their domestic markets in order to grow with the domestic market and thus be able as well to operate broader than the domestic market. So all of these dynamics are about how the economy is being built, how the economy is being broadened, and how our decisions pertaining to liberalizing the economy, or what kind of investment policy we have, what kind of governmental intervention in what investment sectors, in what incentivization of what investments is they are all interlinked. So I'm saying that, and I want to close here, because we often see in the literature and now in the narrative at the global level, particularly here in Geneva, where SMEs is the buzzword, we often see that we are trying to repackage old recipes of liberalization in the name of SMEs, whereas we know that the SMEs, they actually need a more attention to how the domestic markets are organized and how the role of the big corporate entities is being attended to in our domestic markets. So I close at that, and I'm really like appreciating all the inputs, and I really thank you for all the space and the attention you gave me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for joining us and for your insights. We do have a question to get a little bit to some of the questions we received. How do we ensure civic participation in the environmental policy making through accessibility to environmental information as a strong pillar to sustainable markets? Should I read it again or try to clarify the question, or is it clear? And okay, so So the question is basically about civic participation and how to ensure civic participation and taking part in creating environmental policy. And then there's the part that's tied to it, which is basically making environmental information accessible to everyone to enable this kind of civic participation. So how can this happen? Basically as part of as a strong pillar to sustainable markets. So Anna and Yunus, you're left with the tough challenge of the Q&A questions, but I'm sure you can do it. So if one of you would like to volunteer. Yeah, Anna, please.
So maybe I can start, and Jonas, you can jump in as I start to stutter.
I'll do my best.
Perfect. So I think there are two aspects. The first is for civil participation, strengthening civil society as such is an important aspect. And we see strong civil society movements in favor of the environment in many countries, but in other countries, civil society has a more difficult foothold. So that would be one thing that would be important to allow civil society to come into the discussion. The second aspect is then when there is strong civil society and interest by people to organize the process of interaction with civil society and of engagement of civil society. And I mean, there are different possibilities. So public hearings, for example, also public votings on specific questions. So I mean, there are options to organize the participation of civil society. And I think it is not just about providing society with information, purely information. It is also about kind of, let's say, restructuring of values, restructuring of norms within society. And I mean, we see a shift of narratives, of discourses towards protection of the environment, towards more awareness that this protection is necessary. But I think we still need to go a long way towards everybody really understanding how necessary this is, and that everybody needs to take part in it.
Yunus, would you like to add anything?
Just one. I think that's already very elaborate when I said thing. Maybe one that we've seen in Egypt is that quite a lot of civil society activity turned into businesses, that basically people that started with a civil society approach changed their ideas into business ideas and into startups. That is, of course, a challenge, and it cannot be done with all the things. Definitely in no way, obviously. It's not easy you cannot, about any political issue, create a business model, luckily so. But I think this is still potentially an interesting angle to see of some, I mean, when it comes to issues of waste management, to issues of participation of low-income population, topic inclusive business and the like are very relevant, I believe, and could be as well an interesting way of participation.
Thank you, Yunus. I think we got this. It was breaking a little bit. The signal was was breaking a little bit, but I think we heard your point. And thank you, Anna, so much as well. There's another question, and maybe it's a bit long, so I'll try to rephrase it. It's basically about reaching our sustainability goals within the SDGs and the national goals. And it's about looking at the rules for residential and commercial energy consumption. So the suggestion is, that to quote, I would say that the only way to do to reach this kind of sustainability for residential and commercial energy consumption is to set energy grades for each building under construction, to give some motive for developers to go more towards sustainability. How can this be applied gradually in Egypt, if any? I know this is not exactly at your areas of specialization, to be super fair, and I have to say this to our audience, but yeah, maybe if you'd like, if one of you would like to tackle the issue of sustainability within the construction and urban development sector in general and energy consumption, since this is also a very important sector in Egypt. Otherwise, we can also move on.
I can just very on a general basis, Anna, if you're volunteering again, I will not say no, but I will help you again when you stutter.
That's very good to hear.
Great teamwork, I must say.
Well, I was about to suggest that I offer some experiences from Germany. Not sure whether they are helpful in the Egyptian context, but Jonas, maybe you can jump in there. So what we're trying to do in Germany is, on the one hand, we have regulations for new buildings that need to fulfill certain standards, right? And but that, of course, means if we had only that, that would mean that the building stock, which has a very slow turnover, would only be modernized in decades to come. And so we complement that with financial incentives, preferential loans that people can get when they want to make their homes, their existing homes, more energy efficient. And so there's the kind of carrot and stick approach, I would say, to make it possible for people to get active, to invest in their building's efficiency. There's one experience, an interesting study done in the UK, that it's not purely the information and the financial incentive that gets people to act, but they combine that with a service of decluttering attics, right? So it was about insulating the roof, and people didn't do it because they shied away from the hassle of decluttering their attic. And so that program combined this with the service and financial incentive, and this program was very successful. So sometimes we need to think beyond information and economic incentives, and really need to think hard about what makes people act and what keeps people from acting.
Yeah, maybe to add on that, obviously the increased energy prices that we saw over the last period in Egypt help as well to incentivize these kind of topics. I mean, we have an issue as well talking about climate change, the possibility for further heat waves in the summers is definitely increasing. So the incentive of somehow having insulated houses is in general increasing for the people, and as well air conditioning is eating up unbelievable energy bills for the people here in Egypt. Basically, if you manage to raise awareness of the possibilities, and there my expertise is limited, I'm not entirely sure about the costs and how much obviously can be done around appropriate calculations, saying, hey, if you would insulate your house, that would be the cost, and these many years it would take to basically regain these costs from the energy bills. And that's basically something as well that is done on an industrial basis in a lot of countries, and I find that very interesting when it comes to energy saving companies, where you basically have somebody taking that from you, come to your company and telling you, okay, we'll split the gains from what I will provide for you in energy efficiency measures, and it might be interesting as well to look into something like that, if that could be done on a private basis. But as you said, Nadim, my expertise here is limited in practicalities and in how this might work as a business model in Egypt at the moment or not. But anyways, I mean, energy prices are probably increasing more at some point, and so then obviously for that it's getting better and better.
Thank you again, once again, Anna and Eunice, so much. And I would like to say that Mr. Martin made a comment. I am that actually the law exists, but it's not implemented, and up to 60% informal construction. I'm just reading the comment. I'm not really sure of the facts, but thank you so much, Mr. Martin, for also adding to this. Maybe one last question before we go. Eunice, let's do it the other way around then. So there's you asked the question, but then since you're part, and this is why I'm choosing to ask you this question. What can be, since you're in the middle, you're working with the Egyptian government, you're also working with the German government somehow with GIZ. So what can be the role of the German government in a context like Egypt and emerging markets like Egypt? It's one of the nations that claim to be leading the fight against climate change. To a lot of credit in this statement, to be honest. That's one. And two, also in terms of being a highly developed and industrialized economy. So basically to reverse the question, what would be the role in this case from your perspective, given what you said earlier?
Okay, thank you. Definitely, I cannot speak on behalf of the German government, of course. That is not my role. Others can do that. But in general,
no,
I mean, what Germany
an opinion, of course, when we're talking.
No, absolutely. No, there are sentences comes to these topics, so that's why I wanted to clarify that. I mean, what the German government is doing in Egypt already, on the one hand, when it comes to the entire topic of development cooperation and what GIZ and KfW are doing here in Egypt, is basically supporting the Egyptian government and other society players in developing further. That can be around topics of climate change adaptation and mitigation, that can be around topics of private sector development, that can be around topics of energy and renewable energy, and these things are happening, and these things are being continued as well. But of course, as well, I don't want to forget, as this is the main topic of today as well, the German private sector. And we are as well very clearly seeing that private sector in general, and definitely as well the German private sector can play an important role in technology transfer, in channeling investments into Egypt, etc. And there as well, that is something that the German government again is seeing very clearly. And we, for example, as GIZ, have a very strong interest in creating projects jointly with the private sector, where on the one hand there's a clear business case for the private sector, creating sustainability in that way, because business case is always very sustainable. As long as it's creating profits, it's always nicely and sustainable. And in the same time, obviously, we are looking that there are developmental effects that the public good is being created by such a project. And that's something that we believe is potentially highly interesting, besides, of course, just classical investment of German companies here. And you said it already, I mean, Germany, when it comes to the entire topic of Energiewende in Germany, so basically in putting renewable energy first, in leaving fossil fuels and leaving nuclear energy behind, and coming to change renewable energy, that role that Germany very strongly has taken helps as well, of course, to support then technology transfer into other countries. And I mean, when it comes to renewable energy, I mean, Egypt is definitely, and Martin is listening, and he's definitely more an expert than I am here, Martin Neusel. So that definitely is as well something that I see as potentially highly relevant for Egypt, but needs, of course, again, the right framework conditions.
Thank you very much, Eunice. Anna, two things. Would you like to add anything to this? One, and two, as we sadly reach the end of our panel discussion, I would also invite you to hear some closing remarks. Yeah, and then.
Sure, thank you. I'll be brief because it's already 4 minutes past 6. I would like to to echo the need for the private sector. We're facing a crisis that will require all of our creativity. And I'm not talking about the corona crisis now, I'm talking about the environmental crisis. And in the corona crisis, we have seen the innovative power and the creative power of the private sector. I mean, we have seen vaccine developments at lightning speed, right? A year ago, none of us would have thought that this is possible at that speed. And we already see several vaccines that are very promising. And so I think we need to harness that creativity and that innovative power. And for harnessing it and guiding it in the right direction, we need governments, right? We need governments to set the right frameworks and incentives. And so I see the dual role of both governments and the private sector that need to come together based on the societal consensus that we need to act now. That's my closing remark. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I know you've also had a very busy schedule, so I really appreciate that you're part of this discussion. Yunus, the floor is yours.
It's very hard. I think Anna's closing remarks were already really basically summing it up in a very nice way. I mean, the topic and the connection I see between the COVID crisis and the much bigger climate crisis is basically what we hear all the time: rebuild better, right? I mean, we have seen over the last period a lot of rather short-term reactions, very strongly in Germany and Europe, but as well in Egypt, into okay, what can we do? How can we have the people survive, and how can we have the companies survive? But now more and more you hear, and as well we are looking here into, okay, what does that all mean for longer term? And there are a whole lot of questions that I find very interesting. I mean, Egypt actually, when you look at it, economic growth-wise, we are one of the few countries here that still has positive growth in 2020 and 2021 for foresight for 2021, obviously, and that is probably mainly due to the rather sad fact that we are not so strongly integrated into international value chains and thus not so hardly hit. But in the same time, the interesting bit, the point that I wanted still to make is everybody's talking about cutting down global value chains and regionalizing or localizing, shortening value chains. So that might be quite an opportunity for Egypt once we look into the connection to Europe, the proximity to Europe, and in the same time that might of course have then quite some effects as well on transportation and CO2 emissions, etc. So I think that could be something very interesting when we connect the climate crisis and the COVID crisis. And besides that, yeah, I can only say thank you as well very much for inviting me, and I learned as well a lot during the last 1.5 hours. Thank you.
Thank you also from my side a lot. I think this has been a great panel and also great moderation. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. I've learned so much, and I was very fortunate to be part of this panel and to get to moderate and ask these questions and learn. I would like to just, before we go, and I know we're a little bit over time, I would like to leave the floor for Lily, just to, in order to talk about the next Cairo Climate Talk for 30 seconds. And thank you all so much. I'll leave it at Lily.
Thank you so much, Nadim, for the floor and the absolutely excellent moderation as well from our side. And Jonas and Anna, thank you so much for bringing this idea that Amina and I, my colleague, we came up together, and it's so beautiful to see when this is actually becoming a real life conversation where everyone feels like they've learned something. So thank you so much for that. And I'm very happy actually, because I think we kind of projected right what kind of topics are going to be very interesting in this discussion, because our next CCT on the 2nd of December is actually on sustainable infrastructure and post-COVID-19 paths towards sustainable development goals. So I think our questions of the audience already showed that the interest is there. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing hopefully all of you there next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lily, so much. And thank you so much as organizers as well. The amount of effort that's put, this is, luckily for me, this is not the first time I'm part of the CCT panels. And every time I'm just amazed by the amount of effort put into this. And now also to make it virtual. So Felipe, Lily, Amena, everyone, thank you. And I guess it's just important to know that or to highlight just as to close the circle, as people say, that when we talk about moving beyond sustainable markets, or especially the question of moving beyond economic growth or re-questioning things we've taken for granted for decades and decades, given the climate crisis, that it's a highly complex issue. We're still understanding the different dynamics of it, and it's also, then there's the layer of when we add it to a context like Egypt and the economy in Egypt, and it pushes us more to definitely do more research, I think, related to emerging markets. Thank you all so much, and to the next Cairo Climate Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.